Be me, a junior at a liberal arts college. I'm sitting in my Introduction to Gender Studies class, surrounded by people who seem to have already made up their minds about everything. The professor, a self-proclaimed radical feminist, is droning on about the patriarchy and how it's responsible for all the world's problems. I'm trying to keep an open mind, but it's getting harder and harder to swallow the simplistic, blanket statements she's making. She writes, "Patriarchy equals oppression," on the board in big, bold letters. One of my classmates, a girl with bright pink hair and a nose ring, raises her hand. "Yes, Rachel," the professor says. "I just want to say that, this is so relevant to my life," Rachel says. "I experience patriarchy every day, from the way men look at me on the street to the way my dad talks down to me." The professor nods sagely, as if to say, "Yes, dear, you're a true victim." The rest of the class starts to chime in, sharing their own stories of patriarchal oppression. I'm listening, trying to understand where they're coming from, but I just can't help feeling like something's off. It's all so simplistic. Can't they see that the world is more complicated than just men bad, women good? I raise my hand, trying to phrase my question in a way that won't get me attacked. I'm not trying to be argumentative or anything, but don't you think that's a bit of a binary way of looking at things? I say. The professor raises an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" she says, her tone a little chilly. Here we go, I think to myself. Time to see how long it takes for them to start playing the mansplaining card. I just mean that, well, not all men are oppressive, and not all women are victims, I say, trying to choose my words carefully. The room falls silent, with all eyes on me. The professor smiles, a condescending glint in her eye. "Oh, I see," she says. "You think you're an expert on feminism now?" I feel my face start to heat up, but I'm determined not to back down. "No, I'm just trying to understand the complexities of the issue," I say, trying to keep my tone calm. The professor leans forward, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Well, let me tell you something, dear," she says. "Feminism isn't about complexities. It's about recognizing the fundamental unfairness of the system and working to dismantle it." I'm about to respond when Rachel jumps in. "Yeah, and it's not about being fair to men or whatever," she says. "It's about recognizing the privilege they have and working to take it away." Now it's my turn to smile. Because I think I see an opportunity to make a point. "Privilege," I say, my voice a little louder now. "That's an interesting topic. Can we talk about that for a second?" The professor raises an eyebrow, clearly unsure where I'm going with this. "Go ahead," she says. And I launch into my argument, ready to see where it takes me. So, when we talk about privilege, are we talking about the idea that certain groups have inherent advantages in society? I ask, my eyes locked on the professor. I can feel my heart beating slightly faster as I delve into this topic, but I'm determined to explore it. The professor nods, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Exactly," she says. "Privilege refers to the unearned benefits and advantages that certain groups receive in society, often at the expense of others. For example, men generally have more privilege than women, as they are more likely to hold positions of power and are less likely to face discrimination and violence." I nod, taking a deep breath as I gather my thoughts. "I understand that," I say. "But doesn't the concept of privilege imply that we're all just passive recipients of these advantages or disadvantages? I mean, can't individuals work to overcome their own disadvantages and create their own advantages?" Rachel jumps in, her voice sharp. "That's just not how it works," she says. "You can't just work harder and overcome systemic oppression. The system is designed to keep certain groups down, and no amount of individual effort can change that." I feel a surge of frustration at Rachel's interruption, but I push on, determined to make my point. "I'm not saying that individual effort is enough to overcome systemic oppression," I say. But I do think that we need to recognize the role of individual agency in shaping our own lives. If we're just talking about privilege as something that's imposed on us from outside, then aren't we neglecting the ways in which we can work to create our own opportunities and advantages? The professor leans back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. That's an interesting point, she says. But don't you think that's just a form of victim blaming? I mean, if we're saying that individuals can just work harder and overcome their own disadvantages, then aren't we implying that those who don't succeed are just not trying hard enough? I feel my face grow hot as I realize that the professor is pushing me to think more deeply about my argument. I take a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I'm not saying that it's easy, I say. And I'm not saying that individuals are entirely responsible for their own success or failure. But I do think that we need to recognize the ways in which we can work to create our own opportunities and advantages, even within a system that's stacked against us. As I finish speaking, I feel a sense of uncertainty. Have I made my point, or have I just dug myself into a hole? I glance around the room, trying to gauge the reactions of my classmates. Rachel is scowling at me, her arms crossed over her chest. The professor is watching me with a thoughtful expression, her eyes narrowed in consideration. And I'm left wondering what she'll say next, and where this conversation will take us. I think we're getting somewhere, the professor says, a small smile playing on her lips. But let's take it a step further. If we're talking about individual agency and the ability to create our own opportunities, then how do we reconcile that with the idea of systemic oppression? Can we really say that individuals have the power to overcome their own disadvantages, or are we just ignoring the ways in which the system works to keep them down? I feel my mind racing as I try to respond. I know that I've walked into a complex and contentious issue, and I'm not sure where I'll come out on the other side. But I'm determined to see this through, to explore the complexities of feminism and privilege and to understand the ways in which they intersect. And as I open my mouth to respond, I realize that I'm no longer just trying to understand the issue, I'm becoming a part of it, a participant in the ongoing conversation about feminism and its role in our society. As I take a deep breath and launch into my response, I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. I think that's the thing, we can't just reduce it to individual agency versus systemic oppression, I say, trying to articulate the jumbled thoughts swirling in my head. It's not that simple. I mean, on the one hand, I believe that individuals do have the power to create their own opportunities, to make choices and take actions that can help them overcome their circumstances. But on the other hand, we can't ignore the fact that the system is stacked against certain groups of people, that there are built-in biases and barriers that can hold them back, no matter how hard they try. The professor nods thoughtfully, her eyes sparkling with interest. Go on, she encourages, leaning forward in her chair. I hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. My mind is racing with all the complexities and nuances of the issue, and I'm worried that I'll say something wrong or offend someone. But as I glance around the room, I see that my fellow students are all watching me with rapt attention, their faces reflecting their own struggles to understand this thorny topic. And I realize that it's okay to not have all the answers, that this is a conversation, not a debate. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, it's not just about individual agency, or even just about systemic oppression, I continue, feeling my way through the words. It's about how those two things intersect, and how we can work to create a system that's more equitable and just for everyone. I mean, we can't just tell people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when the bootstraps are broken, or when they're not even given the chance to wear boots in the first place. One of my classmates, a quiet girl named Sarah, speaks up from across the room. But how do we do that, she asks, her voice laced with skepticism. How do we create a system that's fair for everyone, when there are so many different perspectives and experiences at play? I turn to her, feeling a surge of excitement at the prospect of exploring this question further. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I say, smiling wryly. I don't think there's a simple answer, but I think we have to start by listening to each other's stories, by trying to understand where each other is coming from. And then we have to be willing to work together, to find common ground and to create solutions that take into account all the different perspectives and experiences that are out there. As I finish speaking, I feel a sense of trepidation. Have I said something wrong? Have I offended someone, or missed the point entirely? But as I glance at the professor, I see that she's nodding, a small smile playing on her lips. I think that's a great place to start, she says, her voice warm with approval. The question is, where do we go from here? How do we take this conversation, this exploration of feminism and privilege, and turn it into action? The room falls silent, as we all ponder this question. And as I sit there, surrounded by my fellow students, I realize that I'm not just learning about feminism and privilege, I'm becoming a part of a larger movement, a movement that's all about creating a more just and equitable world, one conversation at a time. As the silence lingers, I can feel the weight of anticipation building in the room. It's as if we're all waiting for someone to take the first step, to propose a solution or a plan of action. I glance around the table, noticing the thoughtful expressions on my fellow students' faces. Some are nodding to themselves, while others are scribbling notes on their pads of paper. The professor, however, seems to be waiting for us to take the lead. She's leaning back in her chair, her eyes scanning the room with a gentle encouragement. I can sense her willingness to guide us, but also her reluctance to dictate the direction of the conversation. I think we need to start by identifying the issues that are most pressing to us, says Sarah, a quiet voice piping up from the back of the room. For me, it's about reproductive rights. I feel like that's an area where women's bodies are constantly being politicized and controlled. I agree, says Jake, a tall, lanky guy with a messy mop of hair. But for me, it's about economic inequality. I've seen how women in my family have been held back by unequal pay and lack of opportunities. As the discussion begins to unfold, I find myself getting lost in my own thoughts. I think about my own experiences, about the ways in which I've been privileged or disadvantaged. I realize that my perspective is limited, that there are so many things I don't know or understand. I think what's really important is that we listen to each other's stories, says Emily, a soft-spoken girl with a warm smile. We need to create a space where people feel comfortable sharing their experiences, without fear of judgment or retribution. The professor nods, her eyes lighting up with interest. That's a great point, Emily. Storytelling is a powerful tool for building empathy and understanding. By sharing our stories, we can begin to break down the barriers that divide us and find common ground. As the conversation continues, I feel a sense of excitement building inside me. I realize that we're not just talking about abstract concepts or theoretical ideas, we're talking about our lives, our experiences, and our hopes for the future. What if we were to create a project that brings together people from different backgrounds and perspectives, suggests Rachel, a creative writing major with a passion for social justice. We could create a platform for storytelling, where people can share their experiences and connect with others who have gone through similar things. The room erupts into a flurry of ideas and suggestions, with each of us building on the other's thoughts. I feel like I'm part of a dynamic, collaborative process, where everyone's voice is heard and valued. As the class comes to a close, the professor smiles, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. I think we've made a great start today, she says. Remember, this is just the beginning of a larger conversation. Let's keep talking, keep listening, and see where this journey takes us. As I pack up my backpack and prepare to leave the classroom, I feel a sense of excitement and trepidation. The idea of creating a project that brings together people from different backgrounds and perspectives is both thrilling and daunting. I think to myself, what if we can't make it work? What if people don't want to share their stories or listen to others? I look around the room and see my classmates chatting and laughing, still buzzing with energy from our discussion. Rachel is talking to a few people, scribbling notes on a piece of paper and nodding enthusiastically. I walk over to her and ask, "Hey, what's going on? Are you thinking of taking the lead on this project?" Rachel looks up at me, a smile spreading across her face. I was thinking of proposing that we create a website or a blog where people can share their stories, she says. We could have a theme or a prompt each week, and people can submit their writing or art in response. What do you think? I nod, my mind racing with possibilities. That sounds amazing, I say. But how do we get people to participate? We can't just assume that people will want to share their stories with us. Rachel nods thoughtfully. That's a great point, she says. I was thinking we could reach out to different student organizations and clubs on campus, and see if they'd be interested in partnering with us. We could also use social media to spread the word and get people excited about the project. As we talk, our professor walks over to us, a stack of papers in her hand. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, she says, and I think you're both on the right track. I'd like to propose that we make this project a part of our coursework for the rest of the semester. That way, we can all work together to make it happen, and we can use our class time to brainstorm and plan. I feel a surge of excitement at the prospect of working on this project with my classmates. That sounds like a great idea, I say, looking at Rachel and then back at our professor. I'm in. Let's do it. Our professor smiles, a warm and encouraging smile. I'm so glad you're all on board, she says. Let's get started, shall we? Our first step will be to brainstorm a list of themes and prompts for our website. Who has some ideas to get us started? The room falls silent for a moment, and then a hand shoots up from the back of the room. I do, says a quiet voice. What about a theme of identity? We could ask people to share stories about what makes them who they are, and how they navigate different aspects of their identity. I feel a spark of interest ignite within me. I love that idea, I say, turning to the student who spoke up. What's your name, by the way? My name is Jamie, she replies, smiling shyly. I'm a sociology major, and I've always been interested in how people create and perform their identities. As we continue to brainstorm and discuss our ideas, I feel a sense of connection and community building in the room. We're not just talking about abstract concepts or theoretical ideas, we're talking about our lives, our experiences, and our hopes for the future. And I know that this project has the potential to be something truly special, something that can bring people together and create real change. As the discussion continues, I find myself becoming more and more invested in the idea of exploring identity as our theme. I glance around the room, taking in the enthusiastic nods and scribbled notes on people's laptops. Jamie, the sociology major, is now fully engaged, her initial shyness replaced by a confident passion for the topic. I think we could have people share stories about their cultural heritage, their family traditions, or their personal struggles, Jamie says, her eyes lighting up. We could also explore how social media influences our sense of self, and how we present ourselves to the world. That's a great point, chimes in another student, a tall, lanky guy with a messy mop of hair. I mean, think about it, we're all curating these online personas, trying to present this perfect image to our followers. But what about the parts of ourselves that we don't share online? The parts that are messy, or imperfect, or just plain vulnerable. I feel a surge of excitement as I listen to the conversation unfold. This is exactly what I was hoping for, a rich, nuanced exploration of what it means to be human. As I look around the room, I notice that everyone is fully engaged, their faces animated with interest and curiosity. I love where this is going, I say, trying to keep my own enthusiasm in check. But let's not forget that identity is complex, and multifaceted. We need to be careful not to reduce people's experiences to simplistic or stereotypical narratives. Jamie nods thoughtfully, her brow furrowed in concentration. I think that's why it's so important to create a safe space for people to share their stories, she says. We need to listen without judgment, and approach each person's experience with empathy and compassion. As the discussion continues, I find myself lost in thought, my mind wandering to my own experiences with identity. Growing up, I always felt like I didn't quite fit in, like I was caught between different worlds, different cultures, and different expectations. It wasn't until I found my own community, my own tribe, that I began to feel a sense of belonging and purpose. I think that's what this project is all about, I say, my voice cutting through the chatter. It's about creating a space where people can be themselves, without fear of judgment or rejection. Where they can explore their own identities, and find connection and community with others. The room falls silent, as if everyone is absorbing my words. Then, slowly, nods of agreement begin to spread around the room, like a wave of understanding. "I'm so in," says the messy-haired guy, grinning. "Let's do this." As the meeting comes to a close, I feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We've taken the first steps towards creating something truly special, a project that will allow people to share their stories, and find connection and community with others. And as I pack up my things, and head out of the room, I know that this is just the beginning of an incredible journey.